Hello, Math 2 students. The purpose of this video is to help you to understand how to solve polynomial equations that are in factored form. And believe it or not, the first thing that we have to cover in order to be able to understand how to solve this type of equation is we need to remember what happens when you multiply by 0. So if you look at the multiplication table has all of the multiplication from 1 times 1 up to 12 times 10. What is missing from the multiplication table is the zeros, because pretty much everyone knows that when you multiply two things together, if one of them is 0, the answer will be 0. So in my first example here, 8 times 0 is definitely 0. In my second example, 0 times 8 is definitely 0. In the last example, there are four numbers being multiplied together, 5 times 3 times 0 times 10. Well, 5 times 3 is 15, times 0 is 0, times 10 is 0. So remember that whenever you're multiplying numbers, if any one of those numbers is 0, the product or the answer to that multiplication problem will be 0. The next thing we need to remember is, what does it mean to solve? And you have solved an equation if you have identified all of the numbers that make the expression on the left side of the equation equal to the expression on the right side of the equation. So in my first example, here's the left side of my equation, here's the right side of my equation. If I need to solve it, I need to find all the values of x that will make the left side equal the right side. It turns out that the solution to this equation is x equals 2. And the reason that that's the solution is if we take 3 times our solution plus 1 and 5 times our solution minus 3, we'll get 6 plus 1 is 7. And 10 minus 3 is 7. So the left side of our equation is equal to the right side of our equation. That's why 2 is the solution. You spend a lot of time learning how to find that solution, but many students don't realize that that is the point of solving, to make the left side equal to the right side. In my second example, I have 5x equals 0. And what you learned about how to solve this equation is you need to divide both sides of the equation by 0. On the left side, we have 5 divided by 5, which is 1x, and it's an unwritten 1. On the right side of the equation, we have 0 divided by 5, which is 0. Now we know that's the solution because on the left side, we have 5x, and with our solution substituted in, that would be 5 times 0, which is 0. So the left side of our equation is 0, and the right side of our equation is 0. This equation doesn't look as familiar as the two that we just finished. This equation is an equation that's in factored form. And we want to learn how to solve this equation today. How do we make the left side of this equation, the quantity 3x plus 1 times the quantity x minus 4, equal to the right side of the equation? How do we make both sides equal to 0? The equation that was just on the screen was in factored form. A polynomial is in factored form if it is written as a product of factors. And so we're going to start out with just regular arithmetic. The number 15 has factors 5 and 3 because 5 times 3 is 15. The number 27 has factors 3 and 9 because 3 times 9 is 27. And the standard form equation x squared minus 8x plus 15 has factors x minus 3 and x minus 5. And that is factored form. Today we're learning how to solve equations that are in factored form. Here are more equations that are in standard form and factored form. Standard form, x squared minus 8x plus 15. And in factored form, that would be x minus 3 times x minus 5. If the standard form equation was 2x squared minus 6x, the factored form would be 2x times the quantity x minus 3. Now, one thing about factored form, we already know about this part of the problem. If we have a factored form problem and we want to turn it into a standard form problem, we can multiply the factored form and we will get the standard form. So if I make a table and put x minus 3 here and x minus 5 here, I will get x squared minus 5x minus 3x plus 15. And so when I put my like terms together, I will have x squared minus 8x plus 15. And that's what the factored form looks like when you turn it into standard form. Now it's time to put together what we know about multiplying, what we know about factors, what we've just seen about factored form, and we need to figure out how to use the zero product property to solve a polynomial equation that is in factored form. Now we're going to put the zero product property into practice to solve the polynomial equation that's in factored form. And so the zero product property can be used when one side of the equation is a polynomial in factored form and the other side is zero. And so we have an equation here, and our equation has a right side and a left side. The left side is a polynomial in factored form, and the right side is zero. So we want to use what's called the zero product property. Now, what we're multiplying here is we're multiplying two things together. We have thing number 1, and we're multiplying it by thing number 2. Our thing number 1 happens to be an x, and our thing number 2 happens to be an x plus 4. And we know that if either of those things is equal to 0, then the product, when we multiply them together, will be 0. So what values of x are going to make the two things on the left side of the equation 0 when we multiply them together? Well, it turns out there's two possible answers. If we want thing number 1 to be 0, we can write it like this. We want x to equal 0. If we want thing number 2 to equal 0, we can write it like this. We want x plus 4 to equal 0. Because we know if x equals 0, 0 times anything will be 0. And we know if we can make x plus 4 equal 0, anything times 0 will equal 0. So this problem is simple in one way, so we already know one of our answers. One solution is that x needs to be 0. The other solution is going to take a tiny bit of work on our part. I subtract 4 from each side, and I find out that x equals negative 4. And that is my other solution. So the most important part is probably what's coming up right now. We need to check and make sure that those really are the solutions. So I'm going to start out by checking x equals 0. So I'm going to replace the x in the front with 0. And I'm going to replace the x in the parentheses with 0. And I'm trying to make it equal the right side, which is 0. So the 0 in the front, I can't do anything to that. The 0 in the parentheses, 0 plus 4 is 4. And I'm trying to make it equal the right side, which is 0. And 0 times 4 is 0. So in this particular case, we found out that yes, 0 is a solution because it turned the problem into something where the left side of the equal sign is equal to the right side of the equal sign. Now I'm going to check my solution x equals negative 4. So I'm going to replace this x with a negative 4, and I'm going to replace this x with a negative 4. And I'm hoping that the left side will equal the right side, which is 0. So the negative 4 on the outside, I can't do anything with that. On the inside of my parentheses, negative 4 and plus 4 turns into 0. So I'm hoping that will equal the right side of the equation, which is 0. And then negative 4 times 0 is 0, which does equal the right side of the equation, which is 0. So yes, the solution -4 is a solution because it creates a situation where the left side of the equation is equal to the right side of the equation. On this example, again, I'm multiplying two things. I have thing number 1 and I have thing number 2, and they're being multiplied. Thing number 1, in this case, is -15x, and thing number 2, in this case, is x minus 11. And I'm trying to find the values of x that will make thing number 1 equal to the right-hand side of the equation, which is 0. So I want thing number 1 times thing number 2 to equal 0. Well, I know if I'm multiplying two things together and I want the answer to be 0, one of those two things has to be 0. So there's two possible ways that this can work. One way that it can work is if -15x is equal to 0, and the other way it could possibly work is if x minus 11 is equal to 0. So now if I solve both of those equations, I will have my solutions. So I'm going to divide both sides by -15, and I get x equals 0, and that should be one of my solutions. And then I'm going to add 11 to both sides, and I get x equals 11, and that should be my other solution. On this example, again, I'm multiplying together two things. There's thing number 1, there's thing number 2. And so I want thing number 1 times thing number 2 to equal 0. Well, I know that either thing number 1 needs to be 0 or thing number 2 needs to be 0, because when you multiply two numbers, as long as one of them is 0, you will always get 0. So for thing number 1, I want x plus 5 to equal to 0. And what value of x will make that happen? That's what I'm trying to find. And for thing number 2, I want x minus 1 to equal 0. What value of x will make that happen? Well, if I subtract 5 on both sides, it looks like x equals -5 is one solution to this problem. And if I add 1 to both sides, it looks like x equals 1 is another solution to this problem. So quickly, I'm going to check and see if this works. So I'm going to replace both of my x's with -5. So I have -5 plus 5 and -5 minus 1. So I'm hoping that equals 0. So -5 plus 5 is 0, and -5 minus 1 is -6, and I'm hoping that equals 0. And 0 times -6 is 0, so it does work, and it checks, and I know for sure that -5 is a solution. Now I'm going to check and see if +1 is a solution. So I replace my x with +1, and I replace my other x with +1, and I'm hoping it will come out to 0. 1 plus 5 is 6, and 1 minus 1 is 0, and I'm hoping it'll come out to 0. And 6 times 0 is 0, so it does come out to 0, and so it checks out. My other solution is x equals 1. On this problem, again, we're multiplying two binomials together, and if I want their product to equal 0, I know that 4x plus 3 has to equal 0, or x minus 5 has to equal 0. And so to find the solution, I just need to solve both of those equations. So I subtract 3 on both sides, and I get 4x equals -3. Then I divide both sides by 4, and I find out that x equals -3/4. And that is one of my solutions. And here I add 5 to both sides, and I get x equals 5, and that is my other solution. This problem is a binomial squared problem, which I'm going to rewrite x plus 4 times x plus 4 equals 0. And so if we want those two binomials to multiply together and equal 0, we need x plus 4 to equal 0, and we need x plus 4 to equal 0. So I subtract 4 on both sides, and I got x equals -4, and I subtract 4 on both sides, and I got x equals -4. So it looks like there's two solutions, but the two solutions are the same, and that is sometimes called a repeated root. Now here's a problem to try for yourself. Solve the polynomial equation in factored form. And here is one last polynomial equation in factored form for you to solve. Try this one.